Sometimes people we knew as kids come back into our lives when we're not expecting it. For Silas McGrow, a guy who lived alone in the mountains for 15 years, nothing could have prepared him for his past showing up. One night, a pretty woman, in a ripped wedding dress, knocks on his cabin door, way out in the middle of nowhere. She says she's Clara Ara Whitmore, the little girl who used to tag along with him in the woods back home. Silas can hardly believe this fancy lady is his old friend. Clara Ara traveled hundreds of risky miles to find him, running away from a marriage she didn't want. She's got secrets that could change things between them. Why would she risk everything to find a rough mountain guy she hasn't seen since they were kids? Before we go on, tell us where you're reading this from. If you like this story, hit subscribe because I've got something cool for you tomorrow. The fall wind smelled like snow coming down from the tall mountains. Silas McGrow put his coffee cup on the rough wooden table and looked at the woman sleeping by his fireplace. In the glow of the fire, wrapped in his old blanket, she didn't look like the muddy kid he remembered from Millfield Valley. But something about her chin and the way her eyelashes rested on her cheeks brought back memories he'd pushed away like snow in winter. Clara Ara Whitmore, little Clara Ara, who used to follow him and his big brother Tom through the woods, always asking questions and wanting to join their silly pranks. She was maybe 10 when the McGrow family packed their wagon and moved west, leaving the green valley they'd called home for 3 generations. Silas was 15 then, tall for his age, and ready to explore beyond the hills he knew. Now, 23 years later, she found him in his cabin, hidden in a bunch of old pine trees, far from any town. It was funny to him that a guy who spent 15 years avoiding people had his quiet life turned upside down by a childhood friend. He got up quietly and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit clearing where he'd built his life, log by log. The cabin was simple but strong, with thick walls to keep out the cold and a stone chimney that worked well. One wall had shelves with a few books, bullets, and tools for his job. Beaver skins hung drying from the ceiling, and his rifles stood, ready in the corner. It was a life with only what he needed, no complications from other people. Or it was, until she showed up. Silas remembered the moment he opened the door 3 hours ago. The woman standing there looked like she came from another world, in torn silk and satin, her dark hair falling out of a fancy style. Her brown eyes were tired and almost desperate. She wobbled, and he grabbed her arm to steady her. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft but proper, even though she was clearly upset. "I need help. I'm Clara Ara Whitmore from Millfield Valley. Don't you remember me?" For a long time, he just stared. The name rang a bell, like a faint memory. But this elegant lady didn't look like the pig-tailed, freckled girl who dared him to climb higher trees or cross deeper streams. "I know I look different," she said, tears in her eyes. "But you're Silas McGrow, right? You lived in the big white house on Elm Street with the apple orchard. Your mom made the best molasses cookies, and your dad carved wooden toys for all the kids at Christmas." Those details hit him hard. Nobody in these mountains knew that stuff about his family or the life he left behind. He stepped back, let her in, and watched her sink into the chair by the fire, her wedding dress spreading around her like spilled milk. A wedding dress. He noticed it slowly, along with the gold ring on her finger and the bruise on her jaw. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough from not talking much. He only spoke to his horses or the occasional trapper who came by to trade. She looked at him with those familiar brown eyes, and suddenly he saw her, the little girl who followed him everywhere, listening to him like he knew all the world's secrets. "I ran away," she said plainly. "On my wedding day. I couldn't do it." Then she pulled a small wooden bear from her dress, smooth from years of touching. He knew it right away, though he hadn't thought of it in forever. "You gave me this the day before your family left," she whispered, holding it out. "I was crying because I knew I'd never see you again. You said to keep it safe, and when I grew up, you'd come back for it." The memory came rushing. Back, clear as mountain water. He'd been helping his dad load the wagon when he heard crying behind the barn. Little Clara Ara was sitting in the dirt, her dress torn from crawling under a fence, tears making muddy streaks on her face. He'd carved that bear the night before, working through his own sadness about leaving, and on a whim, he gave it to her. "For luck," he'd said, "so you won't forget me." "I never forgot," she said now, pressing the bear into his rough hand. "I kept it all these years through everything. When I needed to disappear and find someone I could trust, I thought of you." That was 3 hours ago. Since then, she ate some stew he warmed up and fell asleep by the fire, worn out from whatever she'd been through. He covered her with his warmest blanket and sat to watch her, studying her face in the firelight, amazed at how life could surprise you. The little wooden bear sat on the table by his coffee, smaller than he remembered but perfectly made. His. Dad taught him to carve when he was 7, guiding his small hands to feel the wood's grain and shape figures from pine and oak. Those quiet evenings were some of his best childhood memories, when his dad put work aside to teach him and his brother old skills. Tom never cared for carving, liking hunting and riding better, but Silas loved the slow, careful work of shaping wood, finding peace in how a piece of birch or maple showed its secrets under his knife. He'd carved lots of little animals over the years, giving them to kids or leaving them on windowsills for moms to find. The bear was special, though, made with extra care because it was his last gift to the valley, his way of saying goodbye to his only home. Clara Ara stirred in her sleep, mumbling something too quiet to hear. Her face, relaxed, showed hints of the girl he knew, but 15 years had made her prettier, adding grace to what was just a kid's promise. Her hands, tucked under her cheek, were soft and well-kept, showing a life far from the tough frontier. Yet she traveled hundreds of miles through dangerous land to find him, led only by childhood memories and hope. Questions piled up in his mind like shadows from the fading fire. How did she find him? What was she running from that a marriage couldn't fix? And why did seeing her sleep in his cabin feel so right, like she belonged with his simple things? He'd built this life. On purpose, carefully, like the cabin, one log at a time, sealed against storms. After the war, after seeing too many good men die for reasons they didn't get, he wanted only quiet and solitude. The mountains gave him both, plus clean air and honest work to survive by his own skill. Women were part of the life he left, along with society's rules and other people's needs. Not that he swore them off completely, he was human, and trips to trading posts brought company when loneliness got heavy. But he never brought anyone here, never shared this place he'd carved from the wild. Yet here she was, and despite all his logic, he didn't want her to leave. Maybe it was the link to his past, the sweet pain of remembering easier times when the world seemed full of hope instead of letdowns. Or maybe it was something else, something he wasn't ready to think about too much. The fire was low, casting darker shadows. Silas added a log, stirring the coals until flames grew around the oak. Clara Ara didn't wake but shifted, the blanket slipping to show the torn lace of her wedding dress. It made him mad for some reason. What kind of man was she supposed to marry that she'd choose the wild over him? Tomorrow would bring new problems. She couldn't stay forever, no matter how much part of him liked the idea. Whoever she ran from would probably come looking, and his cabin, hidden as it was, wouldn't stay secret forever. He needed to hear her whole story to know what trouble followed her into his mountains. But tonight, she was safe. The wind could howl, and the cold could creep in. But Clara Ara Whitmore, the girl who kept his wooden bear for 15 years, slept by his fire. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, that felt like enough. Dawn came cold and gray, with frost making pretty patterns on the cabin windows. Clara Ara woke slowly, feeling strange in the rough log walls, the smell of wood smoke, and the deep quiet far from any town. For a moment, she forgot where she was or how she got there. Then it all hit her like a punch, and she sat up, heart racing. "Easy now," a deep voice said from across the room. Silas stood at the stove, stirring a pot, moving carefully. "You're safe here." Safe? The word felt weird after yesterday's fear, running through the dark with horses chasing her. She touched her jaw where Cornelius Blackwood's ring had hit her, the bruise reminding her how close she came to a miserable life. "I need to tell you everything," she said, her voice rough from being tired and scared. "About why I'm here and what I'm running from." Silas poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought her one, sitting with the same patient calm she remembered from when they were kids. He was always a good listener, even as a boy, letting her talk about books, dreams, and the big world beyond. "Millfield Valley. Start where it feels right," he said simply. Clara Ara held the warm cup, gathering her courage. "His name is Cornelius Blackwood. He owns half the businesses in Millfield now and has been buying up land all over the valley. When my dad died last spring, our farm was deep in debt. Mr. Blackwood offered to pay it off if I married him." The words tasted bad, but she kept going. "I thought I could handle it. I thought marrying a rich man would keep me safe even if I wasn't happy. But on our wedding day, I heard him talking to his men about his plans for me." She shivered, remembering Blackwood's cold laugh, calling her a pretty decoration for his business deals, and worse, talking about shady deals to grow his business in the territory. "He hit you," Silas said quietly, noticing the bruise on her face. "When I tried to back out of the wedding, he said I belonged to him now, that I'd signed papers making him my guardian and husband-to-be. I was so desperate to save the farm, I didn't read them carefully." Her voice broke a little. "I realized I'd given up more than just marriage. I'd given up my freedom." Silas put down his coffee cup carefully, but she saw his eyes tighten. "So you ran." "I waited until the reception started, then snuck out through the kitchen. I'd hidden riding clothes in the barn, just in case. I knew he'd send men after me, so I headed for the mountains. I remembered your dad talking about routes west, about high passes to remote valleys." She looked around the cabin, still. Shocked, she found him. "I followed deer trails and old paths, staying off main roads. It took 4 days. 4 days alone in the wild," he said, sounding impressed but worried. "You could have died out there, Clara Ara. These mountains don't forgive mistakes." "I know, but staying would have been a different kind of death." She pulled the gold wedding ring off her finger, staring at it like it was a chain. "I put this on in the church but couldn't say the vows. I couldn't promise to love a man who saw me as property." Silas took the ring from her shaking fingers, looking at it in the morning light. It was fancy and expensive, the kind a guy like Blackwood would pick to show off his money. Without a word, he tossed it into the fire. "Your old life ends here," he said firmly. "Whatever papers you signed, whatever promises were made, they don't follow you here." Tears of relief came to her eyes. After days of fear, his simple words felt like a blessing. "But he won't give up easily. Blackwood doesn't like losing, and he's got men who'll do anything for money." "Let them come," Silas said, his voice strong. She saw the man he'd become, tougher than the boy she knew, shaped by things she could only guess at. "These mountains have stopped plenty of men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs." She looked at his face, seeing new lines around his eyes and a scar on his jaw from after they were kids. "What happened to you after you left the valley? Where have you been?" His face closed off a bit, like when someone asked about his dad's drinking or his mom's quiet spells back then. "Different places. I was in California for the gold rush, then went north. Did some scouting for wagon trains, traded with tribes, ended up here and stayed." It was a short version, she could tell. His scarred hands showed hard work, and his tired eyes hinted at fighting, but she didn't push. They both had secrets. From their years apart, hurts that needed time to heal. "I can't ask you to risk yourself for me," she said finally. "I just needed a safe place to rest and figure out what's next." "And where would you go?" he asked gently but pointedly. "Back east to family who might not take you in? West to places where a woman alone faces other dangers?" She didn't have an answer because there wasn't a good one. Her parents were gone, her few relatives far away or unreliable. The skills that made her a good wife for a rich man, playing piano, speaking French, running a house, were useless in the wild. "You could stay here," Silas said quietly, "at least until spring. These mountains are tough in winter, and anyone chasing you would have to wait for the passes to open." The offer hung between them, full of meaning they weren't ready to dig into. Staying meant months alone together in this cabin, sharing space and chores in a way that would have shocked polite folks back home. But those folks were fine selling her to the highest bidder, so maybe their rules didn't matter as much as she once thought. "I won't be a burden," she said finally. "I can cook, clean, help with the garden if you have one. I'm stronger than I look, and I learn fast." A small smile flickered on his weathered face. "I remember you always wanted to keep up with the older kids." "And I usually did," she said, feeling a bit of her old spark come back. This time he smiled for real, and she saw the kind, patient boy he used to be, protective of smaller kids. But he was a man now, strong and capable, with rough hands and eyes that had seen too much. "All right, then," he said, getting up to refill their coffee. "We'll see how you handle mountain life. But Clara Ara," he turned back, serious. "If Blackwood's men find this place, there might come a time when running won't be enough. Are you ready for that?" She thought of Blackwood's cold eyes when she refused him, his voice calling her his property. "I won't go back to him, whatever it takes." He nodded slowly, like her answer settled something he needed to know. Outside, the wind shook the cabin's strong walls, reminding them of the huge wilderness around them. Somewhere out there, men might be looking for her, following her trail to this hidden valley. But for now, she was safe, protected by these mountains, and the man who used to be the kindest boy she knew. The gold ring melted in the fire, marking the end of one life and the start of something new, uncertain, but hers. The next few days settled into an easy rhythm that surprised Clara Ara. She woke each morning to Silas starting the fire, the cabin already warm by the time she got out from under the heavy quilts he gave her. He'd have coffee ready and a simple breakfast, usually cornbread or biscuits with honey, sometimes eggs. From the chickens he kept out back. "Never thought I'd see Clara Ara Whitmore happy with plain food," he teased gently on the third morning, watching her eat hungrily. "Clara Ara Whitmore learned to appreciate a lot she used to take for granted," she said, surprised how easily they fell back into their old friendship. "Plus, you always made the best flapjacks around." That wasn't totally true. His cooking was more practical than amazing, but the warmth in his eyes made the little fib worth it. He wasn't used to compliments after years alone. After breakfast, Silas checked his traps or fixed things around the cabin while Clara Ara handled chores. She thought cooking and cleaning would be easy because of how she was raised. But mountain life was different. Water had to be carried from the creek and heated for washing. Laundry took planning and a lot of work. Even cooking was tricky when every ingredient had to be saved for the long winter. Her first try at bread was a mess. The loaves hard as rocks and barely edible. Silas took a bite, chewed slowly, and said, "Well, we've got ammo if anyone attacks the cabin." She threw a dish towel at him, but his joking made her failure sting less. The next day, he showed her how to knead dough, his big hands guiding hers. "Feel the texture," he said softly. "The dough tells you when it's ready. Smooth, stretchy, with a little give." Standing so close, his chest against her back, made her heart race. When he stepped away quickly, his face red, she felt a strange emptiness. But those moments were balanced by practical lessons that showed her determination to learn. One evening, Silas spread out his hand-drawn maps on the table, showing her the trails and landmarks around their valley. The maps were beautiful, detailed, marking water sources and dangerous cliffs. "This is your escape route," he said, pointing to a path. "If trouble comes and I'm not here, follow Willow Creek to this bend, then take the deer trail up the north slope. It's steep, but it leads to another valley where my friend Jake Thornton has a cabin. He'd help you get to Fort Collins." Clara Ara memorized the route, knowing these weren't just ideas, they were survival plans from someone who knew how fast safety could turn to danger. Her riding skills, rusty from years of fancy side saddle lessons, got better with Silas's help. He made her a split skirt from his old clothes, practical if not pretty, and spent hours teaching her to ride confidently. His mare, Rosie, was a gentle horse with smart eyes, perfect for rebuilding Clara Ara's courage. "She's got good sense," Silas said, fixing her stirrups. "She'll keep you safe if you listen to her through the rains." Clara Ara loved these lessons more than she expected, feeling free on a horse, controlling its power. It was so different from the stiff, proper riding she learned growing up, where looking elegant mattered more than actually riding well. One afternoon, while Silas checked traps in the meadows, Clara Ara went to the creek to wash dishes. The fall air was crisp, filled with the sound of water and rustling aspen leaves. She was enjoying the quiet, so different from her old life's. Constant social rules. When she heard horses, her blood froze. Moving quietly, she hid behind a boulder and peeked through the trees. 3 riders were coming up the valley, moving slowly, like they were looking for something. Even from far away, she recognized the lead horse, a black stallion belonging to Marcus Thorne, one of Blackwood's men. They'd found her. Clara Ara stayed still, heart pounding as the riders got closer. They stopped near the creek, one getting off to check the ground where she and Silas had walked that morning. The tracker pointed toward the cabin, hidden in the pines, and said something she couldn't hear, but their goal was clear. She waited until they moved on, deeper into the valley, before slipping back to the cabin. Her hands shook as she gathered her things: spare clothes, her mom's Bible, the wooden bear. If they had to run, she wanted to be ready. When Silas got back an hour later, she was pacing, jumping at every sound. "They're here," she said right away. "3 of Blackwood's men, maybe more. I saw them at the creek." His face turned hard, the easy friendliness gone. This was the man who survived alone in tough places, alert and dangerous. "How long ago?" "An hour, maybe less. They were following our tracks toward the upper valley." Silas looked out the window, scanning the trees with sharp eyes. "They'll be back when they see the trail goes cold. We need to decide, run or fight." "I won't run anymore," Clara Ara said, surprised by her own strength. "I'm tired of being scared, tired of Blackwood controlling my life." He looked at her, maybe seeing a new strength in her. "Fighting means killing, Clara Ara. These aren't nice guys who will back off with words. You ready for that?" She thought of Blackwood's cold smile, the papers that made her his property, the miserable life waiting if she went back. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." Silas nodded, approval in his eyes. "Then we'd better get ready. They'll probably wait till dark, thinking we're asleep." As he checked his rifles and counted bullets, Clara Ara felt a strange calm. The choice was made. Whatever came, she'd face it with the man who carved her a wooden bear and promised she wouldn't be forgotten. The fight Clara Ara expected didn't happen. The riders decided the tracks led nowhere and left before sunset, leaving only hoof prints and broken branches. But the scare changed something between her and Silas, making it clear this wasn't just a temporary stay. That evening, cleaning rifles by the fire, Clara Ara told him the full truth about her family's ruin. Her dad didn't just fall into debt. Blackwood planned it, buying up their farm's loans, messing with grain prices, even bribing the bank to demand payment early. "He wanted our land," she said, touching the locket with her parents. "Picture. We had the best water rights, and our farm connected his bigger properties. Papa tried fighting in court, but Blackwood owned the judge." Silas listened quietly, his hands steady as he cleaned his rifle. When she finished, his eyes held a cold anger she'd never seen. "Men like that don't stop," he said softly. "They keep taking until someone stops them." "I know. That's why I can't go back, and running won't work forever." They both understood what that meant. Blackwood would keep sending men until he found her or gave up. Her only safety was stopping him for good, a thought that should have shocked her proper upbringing, but felt like plain sense. The next morning brought the first real snow, big flakes falling from a gray sky, dusting the cabin and pine. Clara Ara woke to Silas preparing for what he called winter rounds, checking animals, securing loose stuff, and storing supplies. "Storm's coming," he said, pointing to dark clouds. "We'll be snowed in for a week or more. Good thing those riders left." Clara Ara dressed fast and joined him outside, amazed at how the snow made everything look clean and new, like her own fresh start. They spent the day getting ready for the storm. Clara Ara learned to bank the fire for overnight warmth, wrap pipes, to keep them from freezing and secure the chicken coop. Her hands got cold despite Silas's thick gloves, but she kept going, wanting to prove she could help. "You're doing good," he said, as they finished closing the shutters. "Most town folks would complain about the cold by now. Most. Town folks haven't slept on the ground eating berries for 4 days, she said, then stopped, realizing something. I'm not the same person who left Millfield, am I? He looked at her, seeing the color in her cheeks and her confident. Moves around the cabin. No, he agreed. You're not. That evening, stuck inside by the howling snow, they talked about old times. Clara Ara read from her mom's Bible by the fire while Silas carved a small deer. Remember when we got lost in Hartwell Woods? She asked, pausing her reading. We wandered for hours before finding the creek home. You cried for 10 minutes, then got mad and said you'd find the way yourself, he said, smiling a little. Marched off like you owned the forest. And you followed even though you knew I was wrong. I figured we'd get unlost together or stay lost together. Either way was better than splitting up. The words felt bigger than their kid memories, and Clara Ara's cheeks warmed, not from the fire. The way he looked at her in the lamplight, gentle but intense, made her heart beat faster. As the storm kept them inside, she noticed him differently, not as her childhood friend, but as a man. The way his shoulders moved when he chopped wood, the careful way his hands carved or cooked, the deep, kind rumble of his voice. She'd catch herself watching him, wondering what it'd be like to touch the scar on his jaw or push back his dark hair when he worked. Those thoughts were improper by her old standards, but out here, society's rules felt far away. Silas seemed to feel it too. She noticed his eyes linger when she laughed, or how he stood closer than needed when helping her. His presence both comforting and exciting. There were moments, reaching for the same dish, passing in the cabin's tight space, when the air felt electric. On the 4th day of the storm, Clara Ara was fixing a tear in her riding skirt when she pricked her finger with the needle. She yelped, and Silas was there instantly, taking her hand to check the wound. It's not bad, he said, but didn't let go. He pressed a cloth to stop the bleeding, his touch soft and steady. Hold this while I get salve. When he came back with the ointment, they stayed close, her hand in his, her pulse racing. She could feel his breath on her hair. Time seemed to stop, the storm outside forgotten. Clara, he said softly, like a question. She looked up, seeing her own feelings in his eyes. For a moment she thought, hoped, he might kiss her. Then the wind shook the shutters, breaking the moment. Silas stepped back, put the salve on her finger like a doctor, but she saw his hands shake slightly, knowing he felt it too. That night, lying by the fading fire, Clara Ara admitted to herself what she'd been ignoring. She wasn't just thankful for Silas's protection or missing their childhood friendship. She was falling in love with the man he was now, with the life they were building here. It should have scared her, but it felt like coming home. The storm ended on the 5th day, leaving a world covered in 3 feet of fresh snow. Clara Ara woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Silas clearing paths outside. She joined him, gasping at the cold and the sparkling snow. Beautiful, isn't it? Silas said, watching her marvel. I never get tired of the first big snow. It's like the world's brand new. It is, she agreed, laughing as she sank into a snowdrift. But it comes with challenges. He helped her to the barn where the horses greeted them, and the chickens fussed about the cold. While Silas fed the animals, Clara Ara admired his efficiency. Every move planned, no wasted effort. This was survival, pure and simple. Over breakfast, he spread out his supply list. With 2 of us here for winter, we need to ration carefully. Clara Ara looked at the neat numbers. Flour, coffee, salt, bullets, all planned for months ahead. What can I do? Can I gather or save anything? Some stuff, yeah. There's pine nuts near the meadow, rose hips for tea to stay healthy. And if you want, there's hunting. That surprised her until she remembered his dad's rifle, a family treasure he showed her proudly. It was beautiful, worn smooth by years of use, and she wanted to learn how to use it. Their first hunting lesson was a mess. Clara Ara didn't know guns and flinched at the noise, missing every shot and scaring the animals. But Silas was patient, fixing her stance and teaching her to breathe and shoot smoothly. Don't fight the gun, he said, standing behind her, guiding the rifle. Let it be part of you. Feel how it moves and work with it. His hands on hers, His chest steadying her made it hard to focus, but his calm teaching helped. Shots got closer and she felt more confident. On their fourth day practicing, a young deer appeared at a salt lick. Clara Ara raised the rifle without thinking, aimed, and shot smoothly. The deer fell cleanly, and she stared, shocked. "I did that," she said, amazed. "I actually did that." "You did," Silas said, proud. "Clean shot, quick death. Your grandpa would have liked that." She was confused until she remembered her grandpa hunted when he was young. It was odd to think she might have inherited that skill. Cleaning the deer was a whole new lesson. Silas showed her how to use every part: meat for food, hide for leather, bones for tools, sinew for thread. "The wilderness gives you everything," he said, working by lantern light in the shed. "But you have to know how to use it." That night, eating fresh venison, Clara Ara thought about how much she'd changed. Her hands were rough from work, her body stronger from mountain life. Her mind now thought about solutions, not fancy rules. "I keep expecting to feel bad," she told Silas as they got ready for bed. "Killing an animal should bother someone, raised like me, but it doesn't. It feels right, like something I was meant to do." He looked at her in the firelight, seeing her change. "The wild shows you who you really are, under all the fancy stuff." The next morning, 2 mountain men came by, heading to winter trading posts. Jake Thornton, Silas's neighbor, was an older guy with sharp blue eyes and a big smile. His friend, Pete Hawkins, was quieter, watching Clara Ara curiously. "Heard you had a guest," Jake said, sitting in Silas's chair. "Came to check everything's okay." Clara Ara knew. He was making sure she wasn't trouble or here against her will. "Miss Whitmore's an old friend," Silas said carefully. "She's staying the winter." Jake nodded, satisfied, but Pete kept staring. When Clara Ara stepped away to tend the fire, she heard Pete whisper, "You sure about this, Silas? A woman like that brings attention, not all of it good." "She's under my protection," Silas said firmly. "Anyone with a problem can deal with me." His words warmed Clara Ara, not just from the fire. He was claiming her in a quiet mountain way, and it was both exciting and serious. He'd fight for her if needed. When the men left, they carried a message that Clara Ara Whitmore was gone, lost in the mountains running from a bad marriage. In her place was a new woman, learning to skin deer and shoot straight, belonging here as much as the pines and peaks. But that night, by the fire with Silas, Clara Ara shared her lingering fear. "What happens in spring when the pass is open?" Silas was quiet, carving a piece of birch. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay," she said simply. "Here with you? But is that fair to ask?" He stopped carving, looking up. "What would people say about a proper lady living with a mountain hermit?" "I don't care about people anymore," she said fiercely. "The ones who mattered tried to sell me. I'm done with their rules." His face showed hope and wonder. "You're sure? This life's tough, lonely. No promises except we'd face it together." "I've never been surer," she said, and meant it. 3 weeks after Jake's visit, Silas made a big decision. He was studying his maps by lamplight when Clara Ara saw him trace a new path, deep into the mountains, to valleys marked with question marks and strange writing. "What's that?" she asked, leaning over. "Something I found years ago but never explored," he said, following the old ink lines. "A native map from a Crow elder, showing a hidden valley surrounded by cliffs, with water and game." Clara Ara saw the meaning right away. A safe place where no one could find us, even if they knew where to look. Exactly. But it's a tough trip, especially in winter, and no guarantee it's real. The idea grew over days. Their current setup was nice but risky. Blackwood's men might return in spring, and others might notice a woman at Silas's cabin. The hidden valley offered more than safety, a true fresh start, free from their past. The idea became real during a huge blizzard that kept them inside for 3 days. Huddled for warmth, sharing stories by the fire, Clara Ara finally said it. "I love you," she said, her hand finding his in the dark. "Not just the boy you were, though I loved him. The man you are now, the life we could have." His answer was everything she hoped. Gentle hands on her face, lips tasting of coffee and promise, words of love that made her heart race. They made love that night, the storm raging outside, their connection tender and urgent, sealing their choice to be together. Afterward, wrapped in quilts by the low fire, Silas pulled out the map again. "We'll go to the hidden valley when the weather clears," he said firmly. "Whatever's there, we'll face it together." They spent the next week preparing, packing only what they needed: food, bullets, tools, and a few special things. Clara chose her mom's Bible, the wooden bear, and her grandma's sewing kit. Everything else stayed for their return or whoever found the cabin later. Silas packed smartly: his dad's rifle, traps, fishing line, an axe, medical supplies, carving tools, and wood blocks, knowing crafting could be key to surviving. They left on a clear, freezing morning, the air so cold it showed their breath. They loaded supplies onto a sled Silas made, letting the horses pull more than they could carry. "Last chance to change your mind," Silas said as they stood outside the cabin. "Once we go, there's no coming back to this place, or who we were." Clara looked at the cabin, memorizing the table where they ate, the hearth where she felt safe, the bed where they became lovers. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The trip to the hidden valley was as tough as Silas warned. The old map was detailed but didn't account for years of weather and landslides. Landmarks were gone. Trails led to dead ends. For 5 days, they traveled into wilder, untouched land, seeing no signs of people, no footprints, no campsites, no marks on trees. It felt like they'd left the known world behind. The journey tested their strength and teamwork. When Clara's horse went lame, they split the load and walked, taking turns breaking through snow. When Silas fell through ice crossing a stream, Clara built a fire and warmed him, surprising herself with her skill. "You're stronger than you know," he told her that night, feverish but getting better. "Stronger than I thought when you showed up." "I had a good teacher," she said, but wondered if that strength was always in her, waiting to come out. On the 6th day, when she feared the map led nowhere, they found it, a narrow gap between cliffs opening to a hidden valley, just as the map promised. Sheltered from wind, with a clear stream and signs of animals, it was perfect. "It's like paradise," Clara whispered, looking at their new home. Silas nodded, already planning a cabin and garden, but his eyes showed he knew paradise took work to keep. That first evening, they found they weren't alone. Bear tracks crossed, the meadow where Silas wanted to build. It was another challenge, but as Clara fell asleep in Silas's arms under bright stars, she felt only gratitude. They were together, free, in their promised land. Whatever came next, they'd face as partners, bound by love and survival. It was more than she dreamed when she fled in her torn wedding dress, and so precious because they chose it together. The hidden valley gave them 3 weeks of peace before the past caught up in a surprising way. One crisp March morning, Clara was tending their small fire when Silas called her urgently from across the meadow. He was crouched by their shelter, looking at something in the snow. It was a weathered piece of paper, still readable. "Where'd you find that?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Tucked in a pile of rocks by the stream. Someone left it on purpose." His voice was tense as he handed it to her. "Read it, Clara, all of it." It was a legal paper, written in fancy territorial law language, but it chilled her. It was a deed transfer from 3 years ago, giving huge chunks of Millfield Valley land to Cornelius Blackwood. What shocked her wasn't the deal. It was how it happened. The paper said the land was taken for unpaid taxes, assessed by J. Mitchell Whitmore, her father. His signature was at the bottom with an official seal she knew from his office. "This can't be right," she whispered, reading names of families: Johnsons, Petersons, McKinneys, good people who lost their farms because of her dad's work. There was more, a contract between Blackwood and her dad, planning to take valley land, with fake tax assessments for a cut of the profits. "I don't get it," Clara said, hands shaking. Papa was honest. Everyone respected him. Silas looked at her kindly. "People do desperate things when they're trapped. Maybe Blackwood had something on him, debts, threats." Third page explained it. A note in her dad's handwriting. admitting he owed Blackwood $5,000 from gambling losses, dated 2 years before he died. If he didn't pay in a year, Blackwood would take the farm. He was gambling, Clara said, stunned. All those late nights at the office, those trips. He was losing money we didn't have. The last piece was a letter from her dad to Blackwood, written weeks before his death. Cornelius, I can't keep doing this. The guilt of hurting our neighbors is too much. I'm ready to confess our fraud publicly. My daughter deserves better than this legacy. Do what you want to me, but leave Clara out of it. She's innocent. J. Mitchell Whitmore. Clara read it twice, tears blurring her eyes as she saw her dad's betrayal and his attempt to make it right. He was going to confess, she said. He was going to tell everyone and died before he could. That illness that killed him so fast, Silas said quietly. You said the doctor didn't know why. The truth hit her hard. Her dad was murdered to stop his confession, and she'd been too naive to see it. Blackwood's push to marry her, his claim of paying her dad's debts, it was all to control her and hide their crimes. I'm not just a runaway bride, she said, realizing. I'm a witness to murder and fraud, and we have proof. Silas pointed to the papers. Someone hid these here for a reason, probably your dad, knowing Blackwood might destroy evidence. Her mind raced. But who'd believe me? Blackwood owns the judge, the sheriff, half the territory. My word against his means nothing, and I ran from a legal marriage. Maybe not in Millfield, Silas said. But there are federal marshals, territorial governors, people who answer to Washington, not local crooks. She looked at their peaceful valley, knowing it was now just a temporary hideout. We can't stay here with this, can we? We could, Silas said carefully. We could burn these papers and live like they never existed. Blackwood would think you died, and you'd be free as someone new. It was tempting, so tempting, to destroy the papers and stay happy with Silas. Why give up their joy for justice? That might not even matter. But she remembered the families who lost everything because of her dad's mistakes and Blackwood's greed. Many probably died poor. I can't, she said finally. I can't know this and do nothing. Those people deserve justice, and my dad deserves his last try at doing right to be honored. Silas nodded, like he knew she'd say that. Then we need to get these papers to someone who can use them. Someone Blackwood can't touch. Fort Collins has a federal marshal, Clara said, remembering her dad's talks. Marshal Thomas Brennan, Papa said he was honest. Couldn't be bought. Fort Collins is a week's tough ride, longer if the weather's bad, Silas said, thinking of Roots. Blackwood's men will watch the roads, especially if he thinks you're alive. Then we'll be smarter, Clara said, her voice strong. We'll use back trails, travel at night, avoid their spots. They spent the day planning their risky trip, and Clara thought about how her past had flipped upside down. The dad she mourned as a victim helped Blackwood ruin their town. Her comfy childhood was built on neighbors' pain. Her escape from Blackwood wasn't just about a bad marriage. It was about running from his crimes. But these truths freed her from her old life. She owed her dad's memory only to share his last letter. She owed nothing to the society that tried to sell her. Her only duty now was to Justice and Silas, who stood by her despite the danger. That night, as they got ready to leave their valley, Clara wrapped the documents in oiled cloth and put them in her saddlebags. They could ruin Blackwood and return land to families, but only if she survived to show them to the right people. You ready for this? Silas asked, banking the fire one last time. Once we leave, there's no going. Back to this life. Clara looked at the valley that was home, memorizing its peace. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant losing everything else. The trip to Fort Collins was harder than they thought. Spring made trails muddy and rivers were dangerous to cross. A week's trip turned into 2, dodging washouts, taking unmarked paths, and always watching for trouble. On the 3rd day, they saw campfire smoke and spent hours going around to avoid it. Through Silas's spyglass, they saw 3 riders in dark coats, too organized to be random travelers. They're systematic, Silas said, watching from hiding, checking every cabin in town between here and the roads. Someone's paying them well. Clara Ara felt cold, not from the air. How do they know we're going to Fort Collins? We didn't tell anyone. They don't need to know exactly, Silas said grimly. They just cover places with federal marshals or judges. Fort Collins, Denver, Colorado Springs. Knowing their enemies could guess their plan changed everything. Instead of heading straight to Fort Collins, they made fake moves, doubling, back, or splitting up briefly to confuse trackers. The constant alertness wore them down. Clara Ara jumped at every sound, and Silas got quiet, his eyes always scanning. Their talks became short, about survival, not the deep chats that kept them going through winter. The physical challenges were just as bad. Clara Ara's horse limped, slowing them down, and their food ran low faster than planned. They had to hunt twice, using time they didn't have and risking gunshots that could draw attention. The worst came on the 10th day when they reached a ridge and saw Fort Collins below, so close they could see buildings, but still a day's ride away through open land. Smoke from campfires showed Blackwood's men had guessed their destination and were waiting. "They're not even hiding," Clara Ara said, looking through the spyglass. "They want us to know we're trapped." Silas thought for a long time, calm like a soldier. "There's another way," he said finally. "Risky, but maybe our only shot." That night, in a hidden spot, he explained, instead of going to Marshal Brennan, they'd tried Judge Harrison McCullough, who lived outside town and was known for being honest. "His house is on a hill over the town," Silas said, drawing a map in the dirt. "There's an old mining trail up the back, steep and rough, so probably not watched. If we reach him quietly and show the evidence before Blackwood's men, he might protect us while they investigate." Clara Ara saw the plan's cleverness and danger. "If we're wrong about McCullough, if he's corrupt too, we'll be dead by morning." "Doing nothing means no justice," Silas said bluntly. They spent the night preparing, checking weapons, reviewing the route, organizing the documents. Clara Ara wrote a letter with all they'd learned, a backup in case they didn't make it. "If something happens, Jake Thornton might get this to someone," she told Silas. "Nothing's going to happen," he said, but she saw him check his rifle extra carefully. They made love that night, desperate and intense, knowing it might be their last. In the morning, they'd risk everything. As dawn came, Clara Ara lay in Silas's arms, thinking about her journey. 6 months ago, she worried about dresses for parties. Now she was ready to face armed men and corrupt officials for justice. She'd learned to ride, shoot, and survive, but more, she'd learned who she was and what she'd fight for. "You ready?" Silas whispered as dawn lit the trees. "I'm ready," she said, meaning it completely. They took the mining trail in the dark, leading horses over steep, rocky ground. The path, carved by miners long ago, was narrow and dangerous, but its toughness kept them safe. No one expected anyone to try it. They saw no signs of being followed as they climbed to McCullough's house. The house was a big log building with a view of the valley. Smoke from the chimney meant the judge was home, but they watched for minutes to check for watchers. "Now or never," Silas said as they got ready to leave their hiding spot. "If this goes wrong, don't try to save me. Take the evidence and run." "We go together or not at all," Clara Ara said firmly. "I won't leave you." His smile was proud and sad. "I love you for that, but—" She cut him off. "We've come too far to split up. We face this together." They walked to the house openly, not hiding. Clara Ara carried the documents. Silas kept his rifle ready but not threatening. If McCullough was honest, they needed to look like people, asking for justice. If not, they'd need every edge. The man who opened the door was tall, with silver hair and sharp gray eyes that sized them up. "Judge McCullough?" Clara Ara asked politely. "I am," he said. "And you're Clara Ara Whitmore and Silas McGrow. We have evidence of fraud and murder that needs federal help. Will you look at it?" He studied them, noting their worn clothes, tiredness, and Silas's watchful stance. "You're the woman everyone's looking for," he said, "the bride who ran to the mountains." "I am," Clara Ara said simply, "and I have proof why some people wanted me stopped." "McCullough, let them in." But his eyes showed he was thinking hard. The next few minutes would decide if they'd found safety or walked into a trap. Judge McCullough's study was full of law books and a big oak desk, neat as someone used to judging cases. Clara Ara sat stiffly, holding the documents, while Silas stood by the window, watching for trouble. The judge listened quietly as she told her story, her dad's role in Blackwood's schemes, her suspicions about his death. "These are big claims, Miss Whitmore," McCullough said when she finished. "Fraud, conspiracy, maybe murder. If true, they'd mean serious federal charges." "I know how serious this is," Clara Ara said, handing him the papers. "But I think these prove it." The judge spread the documents on his desk, reading carefully. His eyebrows went up at parts. He gasped at her dad's letter and shook his head at the size of the scam. "Remarkable," he said finally. "If these are real, and they look it, Blackwood and his men pulled off one of the biggest land frauds in the territory. So you'll act on this?" Clara Ara asked, hope growing. "I'll investigate," McCullough said carefully. "But charging. Someone like Blackwood needs more than papers from a valley. I'll need other proof, witnesses, bank records." Silas turned from the window, alert. "Judge, we've got company. 3 riders coming fast from the main road." McCullough looked through the curtains. "Blackwood's men, I bet. Word spreads quick when strangers ask about federal law." "What do we do?" Clara Ara asked, her confidence fading. "Stay calm and let me handle this," McCullough said, sounding like he was in a courtroom. "Mr. McGrow, keep that rifle ready but hidden. Miss Whitmore, gather those papers. We might need to hide them fast." Hoofbeats got louder, then heavy. Steps on the porch. The knock was loud, demanding. McCullough opened the door to 3 men in dark coats, their faces tough like hired fighters. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes and a neat mustache, said he was Marcus Thorne, Blackwood's main guy. "Judge McCullough," Thorne said, fake polite. "We're looking for a dangerous woman spreading lies about good people. We think she's here." "I don't hide criminals, Mr. Thorne," McCullough said calmly. "What's she supposed to have done? Theft? Fraud? Running off with another man," Thorne said smoothly. "She stole papers from her husband and is living with a criminal. We have warrants for them both." Clara Ara's stomach dropped. Blackwood had twisted things to make her look bad, saying the papers were stolen to take them before anyone could see them. "Show me those warrants," McCullough said, holding out his hand. Thorne gave him papers, signed by a Millfield judge. "We need to search your house, Judge, for safety." As Thorne's men started moving, Clara Ara and Silas shared a desperate look. They'd come so close to justice, only to be outsmarted by Blackwood's power. But McCullough stepped forward strongly. "I can't allow that, Mr. Thorne. This house is under federal law as a judge's home. You'd need federal warrants, not local ones." The standoff would decide everything, whether justice would win or Blackwood's corruption was too strong. As Thorne reached for his gun, Clara Ara knew their fate depended on one honest judge standing up to them. The air in McCullough's study was thick with tension as Thorne's hand hovered near his pistol, his 2 men ready beside him. Clara Ara's heart pounded as she held the documents that could bring justice for her dad's victims. Federal law or not, Thorne said coldly. "We have the right to catch criminals. Step aside, Judge, or things get messy." But McCullough had faced tough guys before. "Mr. Thorne, think carefully. This house is protected by federal law. Any trouble here is a federal crime. You ready for that?" The standoff held for a moment. Then Silas stepped forward, rifle casual, but ready. "The judge asked you to leave nicely," he said quietly. "I'd listen." Thorne's eyes narrowed, sizing up Silas. "1 guy against 3. Bad odds for playing hero." "Maybe," Silas said, smiling slightly. "But I shoot first and I don't miss at this range. You willing to die for Blackwood's cash?" Thorne was thinking it over when more horses arrived outside, changing everything. "That's Marshal Brennan," McCullough said, pleased. "I sent for him when I saw you coming. Federal marshals don't like armed men threatening judges." Thorne's confidence slipped. What seemed like an easy job to grab papers and people was now a big federal problem. Marshal Brennan was an older man, tough from years of law work in rough places. He walked in with his deputy, taking in the scene. "Judge McCullough," he said politely. "Your message said urgent federal business." "Yes, Marshal. Miss Whitmore has evidence of big fraud and maybe murder in land deals. Mr. Thorne and his men were trying to stop us from showing it. Brennan looked at Thorne, who wasn't so bold now. That's so, Mr. Thorne? Let's see those warrants. Thorne gave them over, knowing they'd be checked closely. Brennan read them carefully, looking doubtful. These warrants aren't right, he said. Judge Whitman went beyond his power, and the charges don't match territorial laws. They're no good here. Clara Ara felt huge relief. Blackwood's trap was falling apart under real law. Also, Brennan said, the way you came here suggests you meant to break federal law. I'm arresting all three of you for questioning. Thorne lost it. This is crazy! We're working for Cornelius Blackwood, a big businessman, just getting his stolen stuff and wife. His wife? McCullough cut in sharply. Miss Whitmore, did you finish the marriage vows before you ran? No, Clara Ara said firmly. I didn't say the vows and left before the ceremony ended. I'm not Mrs. Blackwood. That wrecked Blackwood's claims. Without a marriage, he had no right to her or her things. His chase was just harassment, and his theft claims were lies. Marshal, Clara Ara said, her voice steady, I have proof Blackwood killed my dad to hide their land fraud. These papers show they stole from tons of families in Millfield Valley. She gave Brennan the documents, and he read them with a lawman's sharp eye, his face getting grimmer. Judge McCullough, he said, this is enough for federal charges against Blackwood and his crew. I'll need to take Miss Whitmore and Mr. McGraw into custody for safety while we look into this. It was protection, not arrest, to keep them safe while the law worked. Clara Ara's eyes filled with tears of relief. They'd won their risky bet. Thorne tried one last time. Blackwood won't let this slide. He's got powerful friends. Then they can explain to a federal grand jury, Brennan said coolly. Deputy Morrison, take these men to jail. I'll question them about Blackwood's deals. As Thorne and his men were led away in handcuffs, Clara Ara finally believed justice might happen. The evidence was safe. Blackwood's men were caught, and she and Silas were protected by honest lawmen. But she knew this was just the start. Blackwood wouldn't give up easily, and the legal fight would be tough. Still, for the first time since running from her wedding, she felt real hope. 6 months later, Clara Ara stood with Silas at a small church in Fort Collins, her hand on his arm as they got ready to go in. Their simple gold wedding rings made by a local blacksmith shone in the sunlight through the stained glass. Blackwood's trial ended 3 weeks ago with him guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and helping with murder. The papers she and Silas risked everything for were key, backed by other victims who finally spoke up. Blackwood fled the territory, but Brennan froze his money and started giving back stolen land to families or their kin. The Whitmore farm and others in Millfield Valley were going back to their owners. You ready? Silas asked, fixing his new black suit, looking uneasy and formal. Clothes. More than ready, she said, smoothing her simple blue wool dress, made for frontier life, not fancy parlors. It fit who she'd become and the life they wanted. The wedding was simple and perfect. Judge McCullough, now a friend, led it with warmth. Jake Thornton came from the mountains to be Silas's witness, bringing a carved wooden box as a gift. A few Fort Collins friends joined, people who got to know them during the legal fight. As they said their vows, Clara Ara thought how different this was from the awful wedding she fled. No one forced her here, no papers trapped her. It was her choice, shared with Silas and seen by friends who respected them. I promise to stand with you through anything, she said in their vows, to be your partner in the life we pick, to love you for who you are and who we'll be together. Silas's vows were simple but deep. I promise to protect what we build without holding you back, to share the work and joy of our life, and to love you as my equal, my choice, always. When McCullough said they were married, their kiss glowed in the autumn light, with friends, smiling at what they'd overcome. The reception in the church hall was like their new Fort Collins friends. Honest, practical, real. The food was hearty, the music from a local fiddler, the decorations wildflowers Clara Ara picked. During the dancing, Jake pulled her aside, serious for once. Silas was pretty broken when I met him, he said, watching Silas try a waltz. His past had nearly eaten him up. You brought him back to life, girl. That's worth more than all the mountain gold. Clara Ara watched Silas laugh with a guest, seeing Jake's truth. The lonely man who opened his cabin to her was now full of joy, just as she'd gone from a sheltered girl to someone who could face danger and fight for right. Their honeymoon was a return to the hidden valley, their short-lived paradise. They spent 2 weeks fixing the shelter, planning upgrades, and enjoying the quiet. It'd be their getaway when town life got heavy, but they'd live near Fort Collins. Silas took a job as a deputy marshal, his mountain skills perfect for the rough territory. Clara Ara started helping women with legal issues, divorce, property, fights, custody, using her knowledge of law and frontier women's struggles. They bought a small house outside Fort Collins, with land for a garden and horses, balancing Silas's need for space and Clara Ara's wish to stay tied to their new community. On quiet nights, they sat on their porch, watching the sunset over the mountains that kept them safe. Silas carved animals that kids loved, while Clara Ara read or wrote to families who got their land back. The wooden bear sat on their mantle, a reminder of their childhood bond that grew into love. Next to it was a new carving, 2 people standing together against a mountain, ready for anything with quiet strength. It was the life Clara Ara would have picked if she'd known to dream it. A life of respect, shared work, and love that grew, stronger through tough times. She'd traded a fancy, miserable life for a real one with meaning and a true partner. It was, she thought, the best deal she ever made.